Princess Catherine did not flinch when the first number was read aloud. She did not speak when the second figure landed like thunder across the chamber. But when the court clerk named the source of the unauthorized palace renovation bills, something inside the room changed. Catherine went still. Camilla's face tightened. And King Charles understood, in one terrible instant, that this was no longer about money. It was about trust. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine kept her hands folded, but her silence carried more force than outrage. The Royal Court Financial Review had exposed that the Queen Consort's office approved palace renovation bills without final clearance from the proper household authority, meaning the office responsible for checking spending had been bypassed before the money was allowed to move. Camilla sat across the room with her chin lifted, yet she could not soften the sharp edge in her breathing. Charles looked from the figures to the signatures, and he knew the damage was already spreading beyond a balance sheet. These were not ordinary household costs. They were tied to private interior changes inside a restricted palace wing, a part of the residence where access, timing, and authority carried meaning, because every locked door inside the palace spoke to rank, trust, and the future shape of the crown. William saw Catherine's face change when her office appeared in the approval chain. Not as the authorizer, not as the person who gave permission, but as the office that should have been consulted and was not. The prince leaned forward slightly, his jaw tightening as the clerk continued reading from the documented account entered into the court record. A documented account is a formal written record presented for review, and this one placed every figure, root, and approval mark in cold order. Catherine heard her role reduced to a name on a page, and for one painful second, she looked less wounded by the money than by the insult. Camilla tried to remain composed, but her clipped silence turned colder with every line. She did not deny, she did not explain. She simply waited, as if waiting could still protect her. Charles turned another page, then stopped. William noticed it immediately. The king's eyes had found something worse than the totals. A court official confirmed that several invoices had been routed through an old palace account once considered inactive, a financial channel that should have been sleeping, not carrying fresh costs through the walls of the monarchy. Camilla's fingers tightened against the arm of her chair, and Catherine finally lowered her eyes to the handwritten note attached to the file. The words were brief, too brief, but they told her enough. The renovation had not been meant to come out that morning. Catherine understood then that the real scandal was not hidden in stone, paint, or private rooms. It was hidden in permission. Someone had decided she did not need to know. Someone had trusted silence more than her authority. And before Catherine could understand why her office had been bypassed, she first had to face the people who had the most to lose. Every royal crisis has a public face, but this one had four. Catherine carried the shock of betrayal. William carried the burden of restraint. Charles carried the shame of a decision delayed too long. And Camilla carried something more dangerous than guilt, the fury of being questioned. In that room, titles mattered less than silence, because each person knew the same truth. Someone had moved behind palace walls without permission. Catherine felt the wound deepen when the renovations were linked to spaces meant for future royal duties. Those duties were not just public appearances. They were the planned responsibilities she would one day carry more fully as the monarchy moved toward its next chapter. A palace renovation, in plain terms, meant changes made to royal rooms, offices, or private working spaces. And this one mattered because the rooms were connected to the future, not the past. If her office could be ignored there, then her place in the system could be ignored anywhere. William understood that immediately. The prince knew this was not only about Catherine's humiliation, it was about the next reign being weakened before it had even begun. William stood behind Catherine's chair and placed one hand on the backrest. He did not touch her, but the gesture said what he could not say while the room watched. Catherine kept her face still, Yet inside she felt the sting of something crueler than insult. Junior aides may have known before she did. People with less rank, less duty, and less personal cost had seen the movement of bills, emails, and approvals, while she had been left outside her own future. Camilla looked away at that moment, and the silence around the queen consort became sharper. She felt cornered as the review moved beyond numbers and into judgment, privilege, and boundaries. Charles finally spoke in a low voice. He admitted, through a private documented account prepared for the court, that he had heard concerns weeks earlier, but believed the matter had been contained. A documented account is a written record used to explain what a person knew, when they knew it, and how they responded. The king did not defend himself strongly. He simply looked tired, and that tiredness made the admission worse. William then asked why no one informed Catherine directly. No one answered quickly. That pause became its own confession. Camilla shifted in her chair, but she still did not offer the explanation Catherine needed. Catherine saw Sophie's name appear in a margin note, and the room seemed to tighten again. The trusted confidant had raised an early warning, quietly and before the scandal reached the court, yet somehow that warning had never reached Catherine with full force. Sophie's name changed everything, because it proved this was not sudden. It had a beginning. It had a warning. It had a moment when someone could have stopped it. And the deeper Catherine looked, the clearer it became that the first crack had appeared long before the court ever opened the file. The palace did not wake up one morning inside a scandal. It walked there, step by step, through locked corridors and careful smiles. The real beginning was not the court review. It was a private reception 3 months earlier, when Sophie noticed a renovation order placed beside a seating plan and asked one simple question. No one answered. And from that unanswered question, the entire crisis began to move. Sophie remembered the Windsor patronage reception with painful clarity. The event was meant to honor royal charities and supporters. But behind the polished words, the trusted confidant saw something that did not belong. A renovation authorization packet was being carried toward Camilla's private office, even though that kind of approval needed broader household clearance. A renovation authorization packet, in simple terms, is a set of papers allowing work, costs, and changes to begin inside palace spaces. This one mattered because it included changes to a palace wing reserved for future ceremonial planning. A working area connected to duties Catherine would one day carry with greater weight. Sophie understood that immediately, and that understanding made her ask why Catherine's household had not been brought in. Sophie stood beside a closed drawing room door, holding her teacup untouched, while the packet disappeared into Camilla's office. The laughter behind her continued, but the trusted confidant no longer heard it the same way. She quietly warned Catherine's senior aide before the reception ended, choosing caution over drama, because palace warnings often travel better when they are calm. But the message was softened before it reached the princess. By the time Catherine heard a version of it, the sharp warning had become a vague concern about minor work. The difference was everything. One phrase protected authority, the other protected peace. And peace, in that moment, became the most dangerous disguise in the palace. Catherine later felt the wound of that choice more deeply than anyone expected. She could understand error. She could even understand confusion. But she could not understand why the people around her had protected palace calm, instead of protecting her place in the decision. Camilla's private secretary had also become part of the shadow around the story. According to a recorded staff interview prepared for the later review, a footman remembered seeing the secretary remove 2 pages from the packet before the reception ended. The footman did not know what those pages contained, but he remembered the speed, the secrecy, and the way the packet looked thinner when it left. Charles was told only that minor refresh works had been requested. The king believed that meant small updates, not full renovation costs moving through a sensitive approval chain. He did not see the full language. He did not see the missing pages, and he did not know Catherine's office had been quietly pushed to the edge of a decision that should have included her from the start. The hidden backstory now pointed toward one brutal question. Who changed the language from renovation approval to routine maintenance? Sophie had seen the first sign. Catherine had felt the final insult. Camilla's office had received the packet. Charles had received only a softened version. That single ignored warning became the match. But the confrontation that followed would turn the spark into fire. By the time Catherine entered the private sitting room, the palace had already chosen silence. But she had not. Camilla was waiting near the fireplace, composed in posture and sharp in expression, as though dignity alone could erase the invoices. Catherine did not raise her voice. That made it worse, because every word she spoke was calm, exact, and impossible to dismiss. This was not anger. It was judgment. Catherine had requested the conversation herself after the court session ended. She wanted no aides, no secretaries, and no protective palace language softening what had happened. A private sitting room, in royal terms, is a smaller room used for personal meetings away from public ceremony. And that mattered, because this meeting was not meant for performance. It was meant for truth. Camilla understood that too. The queen consort knew Catherine had not come to ask about wallpaper, fabric, or furniture. She had come to ask why her office had been left out of approvals tied to spaces connected to her future responsibilities. Catherine stood before Camilla with the quiet control of someone who had already passed through shock and arrived somewhere colder. She told her that being bypassed was not merely improper, it was humiliating. Her office had not been forgotten by accident. It had been treated as optional. Camilla's face tightened, but she did not step back from the charge. She said she had been trying to preserve continuity, to protect the palace from unnecessary delay, to make sure important rooms remained ready for the monarchy's needs. Yet the explanation landed badly. It sounded less like duty and more like entitlement. Catherine heard the words, but she also heard what sat behind them. Camilla had believed she could move first and explain later. Catherine set one invoice on the table slowly, then removed her hand from it as if the document itself had become poisonous. An invoice is a bill showing what was charged, who requested the work, and where the payment was meant to go. This one mattered because it carried a coded reference linked to Camilla's private office. Catherine pointed to that reference and asked why it appeared on work her household should have reviewed. Camilla's expression changed for only a second, but Catherine saw it. The queen consort recognized the code. She knew exactly what it meant. Catherine then mentioned the old inactive account. Camilla's silence became heavier. According to the court's documented account, that account had once been used for older palace maintenance, but it was never supposed to carry fresh renovation costs without review. Catherine did not accuse her loudly. She did not need to. Every calm sentence closed another door. Camilla tried to hold her ground, but the room had shifted. Her defense had not cleared the air. It had darkened it. William saw Catherine's face when the door opened. The prince did not ask what had been said. He did not need to. Catherine's expression told him the truth before her words could. She had heard enough. She had seen enough. And Camilla, still standing behind her dignity, had given her the one thing the palace feared most: a reason to demand action. But Catherine's pain was only one part of the storm, because the true power to decide what happened next still rested with Charles. King Charles had survived public storms, family rupture, and the relentless judgment of history. But this was different. This scandal had not arrived from outside the gates. It had grown inside them, under polished floors and old portraits, carried by signatures, permissions, and silence. As Charles read the final page, the crown did not look powerful. It looked tired. And for once, delay was no longer mercy. Charles held the one power no one else in that room could use. He could freeze internal spending approvals and order a full household audit, meaning every payment, approval, and office instruction would be checked from the beginning. A household audit is a formal review of royal spending and decisions, and it mattered because the issue had moved beyond taste or decoration. It had become a question of control. The king knew that if he protected Camilla's dignity at any cost, he might lose something far greater: Catherine and William's trust in the system they were expected to inherit. Charles looked at Camilla, then at Catherine, and the space between them felt impossible to cross. The queen consort was his wife, and he knew what public shame would do to her. But Catherine represented the future, and William stood beside that future with a restraint that was starting to crack. The prince had stayed calm for too long. He finally told his father that silence had already cost the family too much. William did not shout, but his words landed with the force of a warning. If the palace kept choosing comfort over truth, the next reign would begin with doubt already inside its walls. Charles turned back to the file and found the line that changed everything. Earlier warnings had been reclassified as decorative concerns instead of financial objections. That meant serious questions about approval and spending had been softened until they sounded harmless. The king understood the danger at once. If language could be changed that easily, responsibility could be buried just as easily. Catherine watched him read, and she saw the weight settle across his face. She did not need a speech from him. She needed proof that the truth would not be folded away again. Charles then heard the admission that made the room go still. In a recorded conversation prepared for the review, a senior courtier admitted that staff feared challenging Camilla's office because it would be seen as disloyal to the queen consort. The courtier's words revealed the real rot beneath the scandal. People had not only made mistakes, they had learned to stay quiet around power. Camilla's face hardened when that line was read, but she could not make it disappear. The queen consort now understood that her office had become something people were afraid to question. Charles removed his glasses and set them beside the file. For several seconds he said nothing. Then the king signed the freeze order. All palace renovation accounts connected to Camilla's office would be frozen immediately. No new spending, no quiet approvals, no hidden route through old accounts. The signature ended the delay, but it also began the punishment, and Camilla felt the walls close in before anyone said the word consequence. The order moved faster than gossip. By afternoon, phones stopped ringing in Camilla's office. By evening, 2 private assistants had surrendered access cards. By nightfall, every renovation request linked to the queen consort's staff was sealed for review. Camilla did not collapse. She did not plead. She sat alone, perfectly still, while the machinery she once trusted began turning against her. Camilla felt the punishment before anyone called it that. The freeze order blocked new spending, paused ongoing interior work, and forced every past invoice connected to her office back under review. A freeze order, in simple terms, means official permission is stopped, so no money can move and no work can continue until the matter is checked. This mattered because the palace was no longer treating the bills as a misunderstanding. It was treating them as a breach of control. The queen consort's private office was also told that no further renovation message, request, or instruction could be sent without central approval. Her influence had not vanished. It had been locked. Camilla sat at her desk after everyone left, staring at a disconnected office phone, while the corridor outside grew silent. She had spent years fighting to be accepted inside the royal household, and now the same household seemed to be measuring the limits of her power in public view. The queen consort felt diminished, not because someone had shouted at her, but because no one needed to. The silence said enough. Every paused request, every surrendered access card, every sealed file became another reminder that trust had been removed from her hands. Catherine felt no triumph when the news reached her. She had wanted accountability, but accountability had arrived with a bitter cost. The princess knew the freeze order protected her future role, yet it also proved how deeply family trust had been damaged. Palace procedure, meaning the rules and steps used to approve decisions inside royal offices should have protected everyone before the scandal began. Instead, it had been bent by fear, softened by loyalty, and hidden behind polite words. Catherine understood why the pause mattered. If this had gone untouched, her authority could have been ignored again, and the next time the cost might have been even greater. Camilla's office fractured before morning. One staff member resigned after being asked who had authorized the old account, and that resignation sent a fresh chill through the palace. According to a sealed email chain prepared for the internal review, Catherine's office had been deliberately marked "Not Required" on a key approval note. A sealed email chain is a private set of messages held back from public release while officials examine it, and this one carried the kind of detail no apology could erase. Someone had not forgotten Catherine. Someone had excluded her. William received a copy of that chain and read it twice. The prince did not speak at first, because the words had already done the damage. Then he asked to see Catherine privately before the next morning's council meeting. A council meeting, in plain language, is a formal gathering where senior royal decisions are discussed and agreed. But when William finally found Catherine alone, the crisis stopped being about palace procedure and became something painfully human. There were no courtiers in the room when William closed the door. No lawyers, no private secretaries, no polished explanations waiting to soften the truth. Catherine stood by the window, still carrying the shock of being made invisible in her own future. William did not begin with strategy. He began with a promise. The next reign, he told her, would not be built on hidden permissions. William had read the email chain before he came to her, and the words still sat heavily in his mind. Catherine's office had not been missed by mistake. It had been intentionally excluded, marked as "Not Required," on an approval note that should have carried her name clearly. An email chain, in simple terms, is a connected set of messages showing who knew what, who replied, and how a decision moved from one person to another. This one mattered because it proved the bypass was not a rumor or a misunderstanding. It was written, it was traceable, and it touched the future role Catherine was expected to serve. Catherine admitted the worst part was not the money. It was not even the rooms. The princess told William that the deepest wound came from realizing how easily her authority could be erased by a few careful words. She had spent years learning the rhythm of duty, the weight of silence, and the cost of public control. Yet behind closed doors, someone had treated her position like a decoration that could be removed when inconvenient. William listened without interrupting. The prince felt guilt for not seeing the warning signs sooner, and anger that Catherine had been forced to absorb the insult while others debated procedure. Catherine then revealed the detail that made William go still. Sophie had warned someone months earlier, and the trusted confidant had done it quietly, responsibly, before the damage became public. Catherine explained it through a private conversation recorded later in her own notes for the review, making clear that the warning had existed long before the court exposed the bills. A review, in plain language, is a formal check of what happened and who was responsible. This mattered because the palace had not lacked a chance to stop the scandal. It had chosen not to hear the warning fully. William took the email chain from Catherine's hand, folded it once, and placed it on the table between them, like a line that would not be crossed again. He told her they would not demand revenge. Revenge would make the palace smaller, but written safeguards would make the future stronger. Safeguards are clear rules put in place, so the same mistake cannot be quietly repeated, and William wanted them attached to every approval involving Catherine's future duties. The prince's voice stayed calm, but there was steel beneath it. Catherine looked at him and understood the shift. The crisis was no longer just about Camilla's spending power. It was about whether the Queen Consort's office would face a formal royal rebuke, a direct correction from the monarch showing that an action had crossed a line. The next council meeting would decide that, and their private resolve soon became a public earthquake, because by morning, The world had learned exactly what the court had exposed. By sunrise, the palace gates were no longer quiet. The story had escaped the walls, and the country woke to a headline that cut through every careful statement. It was not just about renovation bills. It was about who had power, who had been protected, and who had been ignored. Catherine's frozen reaction became the image of the day, while Camilla's silence became the question no one could stop asking. Catherine saw the front page placed beside her untouched tea, then turned it face down without saying a word. The headline was brutal: Palace Bills Frozen. Catherine bypassed in Camilla Renovation Row. A front page, in simple terms, is the main story a newspaper chooses to show the country first. And this one mattered, because it made the scandal impossible to hide behind palace wording. Catherine felt exposed as commentators replayed the moment she went silent during the court reading. The princess had survived pressure before, but this was different. Her private humiliation had become public proof that someone had tried to move around her future role. Camilla felt the coldness of the morning in another way. The queen consort had expected criticism, but not isolation. Even voices that usually defended her admitted the palace could not explain away unauthorized spending. Broadcasters framed the scandal as a test of royal transparency and future authority, not just household accounting. Royal transparency means the public being able to trust how decisions and money are handled inside the monarchy. And this mattered, because trust was now the only currency left. Camilla's silence no longer looked dignified to everyone. To many, it looked like retreat. The public mood hardened before noon. A crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace, and one woman stood near the railings holding a handwritten sign that read, "Trust must mean something." Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main working headquarters, mattered in that moment because people were not gathering outside a private home. They were gathering outside the symbol of the crown itself. Catherine's name was spoken with sympathy. Camilla's name was spoken with anger, confusion, and disbelief. The queen consort had fought for years to be accepted, but now acceptance was being tested by one question. Had her office believed rules were for everyone else? William watched the coverage with a face that revealed almost nothing. The prince knew public anger could become dangerous when it moved faster than facts. Yet he also knew the palace had brought this on itself by staying quiet for too long. A respected former royal correspondent said on air, through a recorded broadcast watched across the country, "This is the moment the palace learned the future cannot be bypassed." The line cut through the noise, because it captured what Catherine had felt from the beginning. This was not about decoration. This was about whether her place could be erased by quiet permission. Charles understood the pressure had reached the throne itself. The king prepared the final statement, knowing every word would decide Camilla's standing and Catherine's authority. He could no longer protect everyone equally. Someone had to be corrected. Someone had to be restored. The public had delivered its judgment in ink and voices, but the final verdict still had to come from inside the family itself. When the final statement came, it did not roar. It landed with the quiet force of a door being closed. The palace confirmed that all renovation authority would be removed from Camilla's private office and placed under a joint oversight structure led by the king's household and the Prince and Princess of Wales. Catherine was no longer frozen. Camilla was no longer unchecked. And Charles, at last, chose the future. Charles issued the final decision with the weight of a man who knew delay had nearly broken the room. Camilla's office would lose independent renovation approval authority, and every related bill would remain under formal review until the full trail was checked. A joint oversight structure, in simple terms, means more than one senior office must review and approve decisions before they move forward. This mattered because no private office could again carry renovation costs through quiet channels without Catherine's side being consulted. The king understood that the decision would wound Camilla, but he also knew the monarchy could not survive if comfort kept winning over trust. Catherine received the new oversight paper with a steady hand. Her office was granted mandatory consultation power over palace spaces connected to future ceremonial duties, meaning she now had to be included before decisions were made about rooms tied to the role she would one day carry more fully. The princess still felt wounded, but she was steadier now. The insult had not been answered with shouting. It had been answered with structure. That mattered, because structure lasts longer than emotion. Catherine signed the paper, then placed the pen down gently. No anger remained in the gesture, only resolve. Camilla accepted the decision in public silence. The queen consort knew her influence had been narrowed in a way everyone could see, and that knowledge hurt more than any official wording. She had not been cast out, but she had been checked. She had not been stripped of dignity, but she had been forced to surrender the unchecked space around her office. Camilla understood the message clearly. The palace was not only correcting bills, it was correcting behavior. And for the first time in this crisis, silence did not protect her. It confirmed the cost. Charles later spoke to William in a private recorded conversation prepared for the family record. The king told the prince that the monarchy could not survive if personal loyalty outranked institutional trust. Institutional trust means the confidence that rules, duties, and decisions are stronger than private favoritism. William heard the words and understood that his father had finally drawn the line. The future king did not celebrate. He simply accepted the meaning of it. The crown had chosen accountability, and accountability had cut through family. Sophie received a quiet note from Catherine before the day ended. The trusted confidant read the message twice, understanding what it meant without needing public praise. Catherine thanked her for the warning that should have been heard sooner. Sophie had not stopped the scandal, but she had preserved the truth that helped expose it. In the end, that truth mattered. This was the verdict. The monarchy's future would not be shaped by hidden accounts, private favors, or silent bypasses. It would be shaped by accountability, even when accountability hurt. Catherine had been wounded, but not erased. Camilla had been protected, but no longer unchecked. Charles had hesitated, but finally chose the future. This was not the end of a family disagreement. It was the moment the crown admitted that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt in daylight. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.